Welcome into episode 245 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Scott McLaughlin. Bridget is traveling this weekend for work, or this week, I should say. So the Bruins fall to the Tampa Bay Lightning 5-4. In overtime last night, Scott, they fall to 13-2-2 in the season. Opening shift for you.
Yeah, actually 13-1-3, I think, right? Because it's overtime. Yeah. But that it does tie into my opening shift, which is that they blew a pair of third period leads to end up in overtime in the first place. And, for as great as the Bruins have been, best record in the NHL, one of the best goal differentials, they actually haven't been an especially great third period team. They're +3 in the season, so it's not like they're a minus team in the third period or anything. But that's compared to +12 in the first period, +9 in the second, which are both at or near the top of the league. And in third period goal differential, they're basically middle of the pack. They've lost 3 games where they had the lead going into the third, which is tied for the most in the NHL. And that doesn't even include last night because they were actually trailing entering the third last night and took a pair of leads. First one, they give the goal right back less than a minute later. Down the stretch, Coyle gets them the lead back. They're up 4-3. They take a penalty. Johnny Beecher high stick. They actually kill that off, but the very next shift, they can't clear the puck again, and kind of an ongoing problem we've seen in a couple of these losses now. And Steven Stamkos ends up with game-tying goal with 5 seconds left. So, there's some more numbers here that I can get into when we circle back to it, but clearly they do need to improve, how they close out games. Jim Montgomery talked about it after the game, said they need more poise, more understanding of game situations. So yeah, that's my opening shift.
Yeah, and I just want to, off the top, talk about how the Google box score is wrong, Scott. It says Bruins versus Tampa 5-4, Boston 13-2-2. So I'm gonna blame Google for that one. I could look. We rely on Google for everything in this world, but apparently not for the correct standings.
This is why AI isn't going to take over. They can't take away my job of getting the Bruins record right. So
I thought I was taking crazy pills. I was like, I know I just saw it was 13-2-2, and then Robot McLaughlin comes in here. Now 13-1-3. So, but yeah, no, the third periods are obviously one of the main issues for them, and it kind of stems back to last postseason too. Totally different team, obviously, so it's not even worth really comparing. But that kind of hindered them in the playoffs too, having third period leads that was uncharacteristic of the team up until that point. So even dating back to last spring, holding on to third period leads has been a bit of an issue for them. For me, I'm going to mention just how good Charlie McAvoy has been this year. Obviously, he had a 4-game suspension, so he was out of sight, out of mind for about a week or so. And we all locally and nationally, I think too, but locally know that he's a Norris-caliber defenseman and a top defenseman in the league. But even for him, I feel like he's taken his game to a next level this year. He's at a point-per-game pace. And points certainly aren't everything. But as it pertains to being viewed as a top defenseman in the league, unfortunately, Scott, critics and Norris voters, they need the defenseman to be scoring at a high pace, and they don't necessarily notice the defense metrics as much. Nonetheless, McAvoy has all that going for him. He has some stiff competition in the scoring department among league defensemen, which we'll get to later, but he's just elevated his game even more so this year, physically, defensively, and offensively. And I think Scotty has a 7-game point streak going right now, second longest in his career. Is that what you said earlier?
Yeah, he has a pair of 8-game point streaks in his career. That's his career long, so he's now just 1 game shy of that.
Yeah, and he has, I think he has 7 points in his last 5 games. So yeah, he's just playing lights out, and he's being not only the top defenseman that they need him to be, but he's a top defenseman in the NHL, and that's my opening shift. Obviously, last night he had that huge hit on Tanner Jeannot, which was just an absolute thunderous open ice check that you just don't see every game. In the NHL, certainly this day and age, you might see a couple of those a year with that level of like, you just snap your neck like, oh my God, that was a massive hit. And it was against a great player too, because it was one of their tough guys in Tampa Bay. And he had his head down and he was on the Charlie track, Scott. What else can one say? He had a Charlie card.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was talking to him on Sunday after practice and asked him just about, coming back from suspension. Do you think about it? Are you, maybe more hesitant or can you just not even allow that to happen? And he said, like, yeah, I am thinking about it. I have been hesitant. He said his first 2 games back, he was like, I don't think I hit anyone. And I feel like at the box scores, he was technically credited with 1 hit those first 2 games. And I thought Saturday against Montreal, you start to see him kind of get back to normal in terms of the physicality. The offense-defense two-way game has been there the whole time, but in terms of physicality, he stepped up with a couple hits against Montreal, and Montgomery highlighted that, said he thought when Montreal got down by a couple goals, they tried to take a couple runs, and it was McAvoy who sort of responded and prevented them from having any sort of momentum swing that was going to be based on physicality. Yeah, and then Monday in Tampa, like you said, that hit on Jeannot is just, green light. Just Jeannot's in like a, he's trying to kind of poke the puck in. He doesn't fully have control, and McAvoy just sees a chance to stop him in his tracks and lays a perfectly clean shoulder right to the chest. So clearly, maybe not as hesitant anymore. It looks like he's getting back to normal, which, of course, he has to do. And he obviously was going to do at some point. You get a little bit of hesitancy when you first come back, but hitting has always been a part of his game. He's very good at it. He's one of, really probably one of like the cleanest, hardest hitters in the league. Usually, he made a really bad decision and paid a price for it, and that's now on his resume. You can't ignore it, but for the overwhelming majority of his career, it's been a lot of clean hits with shoulder tucked right to the shoulder or chest. So, and he picks up, as you said, another assist on Pasternak's tying goal early in the third, made it 2-2. What's crazy is that he is now putting up points at that sort of Norris level. Like, he's a point per game right now. He's 17, or he missed 4 games, so he's 13 points in 13 games. Usually that's gonna be good enough to be right near the top. I think going into last night, he was one of 9 defensemen who's a point per game or better this year. The problem is that when it comes to the Norris discussion, is Quinn Hughes and Cale Makar are at 1.5 points per game and are on pace for 120 points, which I think they're going to slow down a little. I don't think either one of them is getting 120 points, but both of them could be on their way to 100. And that is just that's hard to compete with. I mean, Erik Karlsson won the Norris with 100 points last year on a bad team while, only playing defense in name only. Karlsson won that Norris on points alone, and I'm not even sure there was the wrong decision. 100 points for a defenseman is crazy. So, he'll probably need those guys to slow down a little if he's going to have a chance to win it. Obviously, that's a discussion for later in the season, but I do think he's playing some of the best hockey of his career for sure.
Yeah, and what you like about it is that it's coming in a year where the Bruins obviously lost leadership in Bergeron and Krejci and Foligno, and but mainly Bergeron and Krejci, guys that have been around for a long time. Obviously, Char has been gone for about a handful of years at this point. So my point is, they needed these young guys to step up and to carry the torch, even though Marchand is still around, and McAvoy is certainly doing that, as is Pastrnak. So those are the 2 guys you kind of look to lead that next generation. And so far, they're both stepping up with flying colors. And yeah, it's for McAvoy, it's got to be, well, first of all, I feel like McAvoy is the type of player that doesn't really care about individual accolades. every player, I'm sure, if they were given some truth serum, would be like, yeah, it'd be cool to win a Norris. But aside from that, I feel like he's more concerned with, team game and team success. And if he gets a Norris along the way, that's obviously great. But, he's a player who's going to be, he's a top defenseman. He'll be a top defenseman his entire career. He'll be, an all-star defenseman. He'll be, any international tournaments, he'll be a top defenseman on Team USA. Like, he's going to be known as a top defenseman, but it's got to be a little bit discouraging maybe when it does seem to be like a popularity contest when it comes to the highest scoring defenseman to win a Norris, and he's playing in an era with Makar and Adam Fox and Quinn Hughes. Rasmus Dahlin is capable of scoring, but then you have guys like McAvoy and Miro Heiskanen in Dallas that are just so all around solid and might not ever put up those points as those guys, but they're competing with them for the Norris, and maybe that's what voters look to first and foremost. Whether or not people agree with it or people want to have a Norris trophy and a Bobby Orr trophy, I don't know, Scott. But either way, he's playing as a Norris trophy winner for this Bruins team so far this year. So to kind of bring it back to your opening shift with the third periods, obviously the Bruins played a pretty solid road game. Kind of, again, I feel like we've said this before, but in the regular season in the NHL and the postseason, but sometimes you just have those nights where the officiating just seems like it's a bit inconsistent, and therefore the flow of the game changes. But it was a very entertaining game. One team scores, another team answers. Obviously, the Bruins are down going into the third period. They come back, tie the game, take the lead. And then it was a seesaw battle until then, right down to the final buzzer, Scott. So if you want to elaborate on if the third periods are a concern for you with this team, or it's just a matter of they got how many months to shore it up. I mean, you can make the argument this Bruins team could be 17-0 if it wasn't for these 4 third period letdowns. And so what are we really complaining about? Nothing. It's just something worth mentioning.
Right. It sounds insane to suggest that there's like any way the Bruins record could be better, but it's like, well, I don't know. If they were as dominant in the third period as they've been in first and second periods, they might only have like legitimately one loss, which is like crazy. But yeah, so first, just to touch on the officiating, because I'm sure people want to hear about that. And let's just be honest, like, it sucked Monday night. I'm usually my opinion of officiating is like, it's fine, more or less. Like, it's a fast game. It's hard to get things right. You're going to make mistakes. Last night was just like noticeably bad. A couple ticky-tack calls on the Bruins, the Lohrei hook. Not sure he actually got the Lightning player's hands. The McAvoy interference was, I feel like they just called it more because of the angle than anything, but I'm like, that level of interference of like, sliding over in front of the guy a little bit happens on like literally every chip and chase all game long. Like, just because there's a different angle and the Bruins are on the power play, I think is why it looks different to the refs. But I'm like, if that's really interference, then every single time that, a defender shifts over to force a guy off his line on the forecheck should be interference. Pasternak gets a roughing call when him and Hagel are both throwing jabs at each other, and Hagel actually gets Pasternak in the face, and Pasternak gets the only penalty. Horrible. Marchand gets hooked on a drive to the net, no call. Pasternak could have been potentially 2 penalties called on that breakaway chance. It looked like Hedman gave him a quick little hook right when Pasternak got the puck, like just outside the blue line. And then I don't know if we ever really got a great look at it, but I thought Perbix got his hands. It looks similar to like the Lohrei penalty. Now, all that said, all of that stuff was in the first 2 periods. Everything I just mentioned was in the first 2 periods. The third period, the Bruins still had 2 leads. The penalties they got called for in the third period, the 2 high sticks, were high sticks. Like, you have to call those. So what happened in the third period? Not the ref's fault. Like that was the Bruins' own doing. Um, and yeah, it's just yeah, I think we can get into Mason Lohrei a little more as we go here and kind of where we think he stands. But when they go up 3-2, he comes back in a puck retrieval while the Lightning are changing lines. And there's only one forechecker coming in. There's three Bruins back. Lohrei and McAvoy and Zaka are both close to him. All Lohrei has to do is like swing around the other side of the net, and instead he plays the puck back into traffic right where the only forechecker is. Now you get like a 50-50 battle. The Bruins lose it. Or actually, they kind of win it because Zaka ends up with the puck. Then he blindly throws it up the boards. It's kept in the zone. Next thing you know, it's a goal. Like, again, just to Jim Montgomery's point about like puck management and knowing the score and situation, like that was not good puck management. That was taking what should have been an easy retrieval and breakout and turning it into a contested battle and like scrambling to get back. The Beecher penalty, unfortunate, like nothing, he's not trying to high stick him there, but he kind of has a stick out loose and it slides up. They actually managed to get the kill, but then, but there's a couple plays in there, like forward had a failed clear. Marchand has the puck in the neutral zone, can send it in deep and instead tries a cross ice pass that gets picked off and turned right back up ice. So there's more zone time. And then finally, like the fatal clear is Pavel Zacha. Like all he has to do is just hammer it down the ice, really in almost any direction. And instead he tries, it's like he's trying to flip it over Victor Hedman to like Johnny Beecher, who's kind of behind him. And it's like, you don't have to do that. Like there's 10 seconds left in the game. Just hammer it down the length of the ice. And Hedman keeps it in, and 5 seconds later, game's tied and you're going to overtime.
Yeah, and you mentioned Zacha, and I wanted to bring him up as well, and we're going to get to who's up and who's down later on. But I do want to give him and Coyle and JVR a shout out because they all factored in last night in the game on the score sheet. Zacha ties the game 1-1. Coyle gives the Bruins the lead late on an assist from JVR, and there's been a lot of talk going into the into the regular season from the off season about, okay, we think Zacha can produce like a top 6 centerman because we saw him produce 57 points last year, though he was on the wing for most of it. But with an elevated role with Pasternak all year, we think he's capable of being a top 6 producer. Coyle, we weren't so sure about, and JVR, we weren't so sure about anymore. But through the first 17 games this year, they're all flirting with a point per game, just a little bit under a point per game. I think Coyles are on pace for like 75 points or like maybe like 73 or 4 points, and Zacha's on pace for around 70. JVR is on pace for between 65 and 70. And again, like they all chip in last night again, and so they're not going to be who's up for me later on, but I did want to mention them and the importance of those 3 players producing. It can't be understated. Like they're all on. Well, I don't know about JVR in particular, but for Zacha and Coyle, they're on pace for career highs. And Coyle in particular, like did anybody anticipate him being just under a point per game pace at Thanksgiving? I don't think so. I think most people would say probably not. They would doubt it. So Scott, just your opinion on their games for the first month and a half of the season so far.
Yeah, it's been huge. Even early on this season, Coyle started the year on a line with Marchand and DeBrusk, and you think, hey, that's a good spot. And they didn't really click right away. They weren't putting up points. And, Coyle kind of quickly gets dropped down to, quote unquote, third line or whatever. Now he is producing like not just like a second line center, but like a really good one. And, we've talked about it, like JVR, Coyle, Frederick doesn't seem like a second line when you look at it on paper. Like you think that'd be a really good third line. But right now they are producing like a second line. Like, and you just keep riding that for as long as it lasts. And obviously they, most nights they're playing a really good style of hockey, really effective. Like they're possessing the puck, they get in on the forecheck, they're good around the net, like they can all protect the puck. So you like the style they play. They're all pretty responsible defensively. Um, Last night, I actually thought was one of the quieter games we've seen from them for most of the night. But then in crunch time, when it matters, they step up with that goal, which is just like, it's sort of exactly what you want to see. It's, Van Riemsdyk and Frederick in on the forecheck. Frederick helps free up the puck. And JVR, I think Brick highlighted this on the broadcast. It's like he knew exactly what he was doing before the puck even got to him because he saw Coyle coming. And Coyle just buries it with the great finish under the bar. So yeah, like they find a way to impact the game and put the Bruins in a position to get a win, even on a night where they were kind of relatively held in check. And obviously, doesn't end up getting them the win. They do get the point. They still got to overtime, but yeah, that line in particular, and with Zacha, I thought that line was dominant last night. Martian, Zacha, Pasternak, like they had a really good game. I think they've had several really good ones in a row. I think it's 4 straight games that line scored at least one goal. They were creating chances all night, and again, you saw them step up in the third period. Pasternak scores the tying goal to make it 2-1. So, they had a goal before that back in the first period. Zacha scoring, so they get on the board twice Monday night and are, really playing like a true top line now, which if you're gonna load up your top line with Marchand and Pasternak, they have to. Yes, you're still gonna need depth scoring behind them, but that has to be like a legitimate top line, and they're looking like it right now.
So what do you feel like this team offensively needs? Let's just jump ahead a couple of months, right? Let's say because I like the look of these lines. I like Marchand and Pasternak together because I think this team needs it. Like you don't have Taylor Hall in your third line this year, right? You don't have Bergeron, Krejci, Coyle up the middle. Like you don't have the high end depth. Tyler Bertuzzi floating around. Like you don't have the high end depth you did last year, where you could split up, Marchand and Pasternak and all these guys and put them on different lines and Taylor Hall. You kind of this team, while they are scoring at a very, very acceptable pace, Scott. Are they top 10 in offense yet? Do we know? Or we know the top half of the league, but
they might be. I'm going to take a look, but I think they might have climbed that high.
So while you confirm that, they are scoring. Like scoring is not an issue for this team. Are they scoring as much as last year? No, but last year was a ridiculous pace. They're scoring enough and at a very good rate, but they do. I think to do that, I think they do need Marchand and Pasternak together, and that JVR, Coyle, Frederick line's been great. So let's just say, Scott, that those two lines I just mentioned, they stick together. First question, do you like those lines in place for this team long term, especially if DeBrusk and Patra can find something and get scoring, which we all think that they will, obviously. So let's say this is the forward grouping and it's like a few months from now. Like, do you just want to add a potential middle six, top six winger? Like what do you think this team needs? Because they're tops in the league. We expect them to be in the playoffs fully and to contend, because when you finish as a top 5 team in the NHL, which they kind of obviously project to do, you should be a contender. So are you content with this forward grouping, or when we get to the trade deadline, you think the Bruins are going to just try to add some middle six muscle or something? And by muscle, I mean scoring punch.
Yeah, I'm fine with the group for now. I do like that top line. I like the way JVR Coyle Frederick plays together. Um, I had liked the way Heinen, Potter, DeBrusque was playing, even though they weren't scoring a lot. I did think they were pretty quiet Monday night. Couple decent shifts, but one of their quieter games overall. And we saw Potter kind of ended up demoted to the fourth line and didn't get a lot of shifts in the third period. And Johnny Beecher actually bumped up and got more shifts with that Heinen DeBrusque line, which I think was partly because Beecher played great. That might have been his, the late high sticking penalty aside, might have been his best game yet. He scored a big goal in the third period. And part of it was also, I think if you're shortening the bench, they trust Beecher more to try to hold on to a third period lead than Patra at this point in their careers. Again, ironic because it ends up, for all the good work he had done before, that ends up being Beecher who, takes a pretty costly penalty late that helps Tampa build momentum, eventually leading up to the tying goal. But yeah, long. By the way, they are up to 11th in scoring, 3.47 goals per game, and they're right behind, like within percentage points of Tampa Bay, Dallas, and Toronto. So it's like, yeah, if that's where you're going to be offensively, like that's good enough if you're the best defensive team in the league. Longer term, it does still feel like they're going to need another difference maker somewhere, just someone who can go out and make something happen, like in a third period or with some individual creativity. But it's not a pressing need right now. Like you said, like they've picked it up offensively over the last couple of weeks. So, I think you're just fine for now. That they're getting their defensemen more involved. So yeah, let things play out. That Patra DeBrusque combo in particular, whether it's Heinen with them or Morgan Geekie could be coming back relatively soon, within the next week or two. Like I still want to see give those two longer run and see if they can build something and put up some points, but it hasn't happened yet. And I do think there's, the longer it goes on, like the more frustration kind of builds. You see Montgomery, sort of demote Potter in this game, and he said, DeBrusque is doing the right things in spurts, but not consistently enough. So it's hard. The longer this drags on for them, the harder it is for them to like stay focused on just doing the right things, because DeBrusque considers himself a scorer. Patra has scored at every level he's been at, and they're not used to going through a stretch where I think each one of them has like 1 point in the last 5 or 6 games. Like they're not used to that. So naturally some frustration is gonna be creeping in for them.
Yeah. And we'll circle back on them in a few minutes too. Like, let me ask you this, Scott. If you're the Bruins management and your GMs around the league, are you looking at the Bruins and are the Bruins looking at themselves in the mirror, saying to themselves the numbers we said earlier? Well, we got Coyle and we got Zacha as our top two centermen, and they're both, projected just shy of point per game this year, if that trajectory were to continue. But do you think the Bruins and the rest of the NHL are still looking at Boston and being like, okay, that's great, but like they still like they need another top end center, like, because the numbers, if you're trying to play Moneyball, right, like Coyle and Zacha, they're doing exactly like what you'd hope they do, if not more. The numbers are there, but is that enough? Like does this team, and again, the market dictates a lot what's available, what can be had, if you can even add a top two center. But like, I don't know. It's like rationally, you sit there and say, Coyle and Zacha aren't a number 1 and number 2 center on a Stanley Cup champion. But like the numbers say they could be if the rest of the team is well rounded like Boston is. So like where does your mind lean on in this? Like, do you feel like it's a little too good to be true? Do you feel like it's a little smoke and mirrors, or like, yeah, the numbers are good, but it's still just doesn't like that. The teams don't win without at least an elite number 1 and number 2 centerman.
Right. Like that's the thing. It's like it is, if you look through Stanley Cup winners, most of them have an elite number 1 center. Like Vegas has Jack Eichel, Colorado, Nathan McKinnon, Tampa with their back-to-back wins has Braden Point and Steven Stamkos. Washington has, Nicholas Backstrom in his prime. Penguins obviously have Crosby and Malkin. Like
Taves, Kopitar,
Blackhawks,
Bergeron.
Taves. Yeah, exactly. And
Krejci.
right. Like oddly enough, like the Bruins might be the team in there where you're like, you're going back to 2011, and it's like where Krejci and Bergeron were obviously both very, very good, but like were they truly elite? Regular season stats wise, you wouldn't say so offensively, but obviously Krejci stepped up in the playoffs and led everyone in postseason scoring. So, like they at least have to have that ability to like step up and produce at a high rate in the playoffs. And I do think like Zacha could do that, right? Especially if he's playing between Marchand and Pasternak. It's like you could see him getting hot and putting up a bunch of points in the playoffs, but you're projecting a little there. Like it's not a sure thing. Coyle has had some good moments in the playoffs, but again, like you would never really confuse him as like a big time playoff performer offensively. So like that would be something new if that happens for him this year. So yeah, I do think like there's going to be those questions until or unless they do it, because the fact is most Stanley Cup winners have an elite number 1 center, and it remains to be seen whether the Bruins have that. Right now, kind of no matter how high you are on Zacha, you'd probably say they don't have that right now. So they would have to do it, a little differently.
Yeah, I mean, again, they're being asked to play in an elevated role, more elevated than they've ever been asked to play in their careers. Although Charlie Coyle was tasked with second line center at the beginning of a couple of seasons ago, and then Eric Halla ended up taking that spot. But they're being asked to play elevated roles, and to their credit, they're delivering. But on paper, and you can be as much of a tummy sticks Bruins fan as you want and sit there and point out the stats and say, well, they have number 1 and number 2 center stats right now. And I'm not saying they don't. But if you look at the roster on paper, you can't help but think both players respectfully, they should be one slot behind where they're playing, right? Like Pavel Zacha, to me, if he's playing the way he's played so far this year and the way he played last year with Krejci and Pasternak, even though he was on the wing, like he would be a perfect number 2 center on a Stanley Cup champion. And Charlie Coyle, we've been saying for years, would be the perfect number 3 center on a Stanley Cup champion. And that, that's where Coyle's been for Boston since he's been here, and they haven't been able to get the job done, but it's not because of Coyle, I would say, obviously. And it's like, if you could just get that one guy to put ahead of him. Now we know that guy's probably not out there, and this it kind of makes this conversation maybe a little bit moot, but that's just the feeling that I have looking at this team is like, man, if Zacha was a number 2 center and Coyle's number 3 center, and I mean, and it's annoying because like that's the depth that they had last year, and they ruined it. So it's what we learned last year is ideal rosters on paper don't mean anything necessarily come playoff time, but it does feel like if this team wants to win a Stanley Cup, they do seem like they're a top 2 center, and in particular, maybe a true number 1 center short. But maybe Zacha turns into that guy. I don't know. It's just like you said, until you see it, you can't help but feel like that's what's lacking to win a cup. to be where they are right now is amazing. They've played amazing, and they might play amazing the rest of the season. It's tough to visualize them winning the Stanley Cup with this current, I don't know, depth or lack thereof up front. But again, the rest of the team is so strong. It's maybe they could do a 2011 situation where Bergeron was still coming back from his concussion and wasn't offensively where he was later in his career. Well, he was great offensively earlier in his career. Then the concussion set him back a few years with offense. And then Krejci was still young in the league. So maybe they could do something like the 2011 Bruins where they didn't have the best number one center in the league and just won on team identity and team completeness. We'll have to see, Scott.
Well, and goaltending and defense, specifically, which is very much how this team will have to win, come playoffs. I would also say, I think Patra is an important part of this discussion too. Not that I expect him at 19 years old to elevate to, a number one, like a legit number one center, but if he's playing and producing like a strong third line center, one way to combat maybe the lack of like the true high end center is just have 3 or 4 really good lines that, if you feel like you can roll out your top 3 lines against any top 3 line on another team, you're going to be in good shape. Like if you can win matchups by depth and not have, a line in there that you have to protect or try to keep away from certain matchups or whatever, like you'll be in good shape. So you can do it that way too. And that's where like Patra stepping up, getting back to sort of the player we saw more earlier in the season and building off that can be really important for this team, because Patra at that level is a real asset up the middle that gives you, okay, maybe not, an elite number one center, but now you have 3 really good centers on your top 3 lines who are all producing at a pretty good rate. You have a 4th line you like that can handle defensive assignments. But if Padra's going to be quiet like he has been for this last little stretch, and if Montgomery's not going to trust him in the third period of a 1-goal game like he clearly didn't Monday night, well, now you don't really have that depth. Now you have a third line that's not really an asset, but a line that you're trying to protect and hide from certain matchups, and like that becomes really tough. We all know the importance of a third line in the playoffs. So you can counteract and not having that true, top 10 center in the league if you have, 3 really good lines, 3 really good centers that you feel good about.
Yeah, and maybe you mentioned earlier, you said I think they eventually might need a difference maker or a game changer or a game breaker up front, and maybe that comes in the form of a winger, right? Like maybe if they have 3 centermen,
maybe it's Jake DeBrusk. Who knows?
Maybe it is. Maybe it's Fabian Lysell.
Yeah.
But no, maybe what you just need out of your centerman is just to play responsible two-way hockey. I mean, maybe you don't need a 90-point number one centerman, as we talked about. Like the Bruins didn't have that in 2011. Maybe you just need responsible two-way players up the middle, and that can score, obviously. But you just have depth and balance. I mean, one thing I've definitely learned from last year, and I knew about it going into the playoffs last year. I was aware of it, but I was like, this team's too good to falter in the first round. But again, having a dream team on paper doesn't necessarily equate to postseason success. I mean, the Bruins had everything on paper last year, and they literally they fell like a underwhelming 8th seed roster in the first round. Like their season was just as long, right? So I think that if you just have strong goaltending and defense, and that's what you're predicated on, and then everything else falls into place. Like, you also don't want to mess with chemistry. Say there is a top 2 center out there that you want to bring into your team. But all season, Zaka's been gelling with Pasternak and Marchand, and Coyle's been gelling with JVR and Frederick or whatever. It's like and then those combinations change for one reason or another, like because you bring in somebody. Maybe the lesson to be learned is like if you got into a certain place with the roster that you have, maybe trust it. Maybe don't blow it up to try to bring in an A+ roster. Maybe just try to complement it and see where this group brings you. Like maybe there's a lesson to be learned there. And in today's day and age with the salary cap, the hard cap, like there are no perfect rosters out there. Again, last year's Bruins one was pretty perfect. It looked like on paper because they were able to manipulate the salary cap with the IR situations and whatnot. But for teams that have, maybe the Bruins don't have an elite number 1 center, but maybe teams that have an elite number 1 center don't have a 60+ goal scorer on the wing, or don't have a depth on the third line because they just can't allocate the cash everywhere. So there's a give and a take. And yeah, I guess to summarize, maybe the lessons learned from last year are just don't put so much stock in like the perfect roster, and don't try to uproot the chemistry that's gotten you to where they are so far.
Yeah, they also might not have a McAvoy, Lindholm, and even Carlo that they're building their defense around. And we know Lindholm got off to a slow start this year, but he's picked it up over the last week plus. They might be a team that's gone cheap at goalie and is just hoping someone gets hot, which can happen, but also for a lot of teams doesn't happen. So yeah, it's the Bruins have advantages in other places. At least in the regular season. Obviously, last year those advantages did not carry over to the first round. But yeah, want to transition to, because we kind of already touched on a couple of the ups and downs. But I'm gonna kick it off with a bit of a maybe a spicy down that I'll be interested, what you think of them. I think it can lead to a little bit longer of a discussion, but I thought Monday night was overall a down game for Mason Lohrei, and he did make a nice play to get an assist on Pasternak's goal early in the third period. But overall, I thought, I mentioned the rough play he made coming back in the retrieval on what ended up leading to Tampa's goal to tie at 3-3. He had a penalty that, again, I thought was pretty questionable, but a couple tougher shifts earlier in the game too. And overall, I did think, on the whole, probably more of a negative game. Montgomery took him off the pairing with McAvoy for part of the game and was kind of shaking things up a little. You saw Forbert get some shifts with McAvoy, Lindholm some shifts with McAvoy. Lohrei ends up at just 12:46 time on ice. So curious what you think about where he's at. And, obviously this discussion, it becomes a little more important because it's now just 2 games to go until we think Matt Grzelcyk's back. He's eligible to return Saturday. And it sounds like there's, a pretty good chance that he will be ready Saturday.
All right. So our friend Anthony over at Bruins Network, he tweeted something out this morning, and I think it summarizes pretty much my thoughts as well on Lohrei. And he said, Mason Lohrei hasn't had his best defense in the last few games while drawing tough matchups with McAvoy. That said, he shines on breakouts / attacks where he could easily have more points than he does. He needs these reps against NHLers, not AHLers, to improve his game. So I totally understand why people are saying he's not ready defensively. He needs to go down to Providence. His ceiling is really high. He's been playing, like, we see the offense, we see the upside, but his defense needs improvement. Send him down to Providence. and learn in all situations and gain that ice time and gain those reps where he's going to play every minute of every game. I got it loud and clear. Okay. But personally, I agree. Defensively, that's where he needs to work on the most. Defensively. But defensively, he will improve the most by playing against the best players in the world, not against the 5th and 6th line on the depth chart for the Washington Capitals down in Hershey, or, you know, the Barracuda Sharks, or like it doesn't, he needs to play against the best to get better. Iron sharpens iron. And I think that what makes this difficult is, yeah, like Grizzlies coming back. So something's got to give. So the Bruins very well may send him down to Providence. And if they do, it's not the end of the world. I think he'll be back up because so is the NHL. Guys get hurt, and he's clearly the first call up at this point for Boston, right? I just think like maybe just send Ian Mitchell down, or I think maybe have him in the rotation. Like I know, Scott, you mentioned like you were open to a rotation earlier, a 7D rotation earlier in the season than later. So, but I also think you fall in the camp of sending him down to Providence too. So make up your mind. But I think that like they should keep him around when Grizzly comes back and just do a 7D rotation. That's what I feel. You can be selective about when you play him, but I think like last night, did he get exposed a little bit against Tampa Bay? Yeah. Is he going to learn more by getting exposed against Steven Stamkos and Nikita Kucherov and others and Braden Point? Yeah, I think he's better off for it. And I guess I don't want to go too long-winded, but that's my opinion. I think he's been clearly he needs work defensively, but I think he's one of these players that is good enough to develop at the highest level. And I think that's what they should do. I know it's a difficult situation. They might want to send him down for those reps. But if you're asking me, I think it's early on in the season. Do a 7D rotation, and I like him. I think he has some work to do. But again, I think he's going to benefit most by learning against the best players in the world. Because Scott, like not, playing 25 minutes a night down in Providence, like, yeah, he might be a lockdown, shutdown guy, but then you call him back up and he's playing against Austin Matthews. It's a totally different world, and nothing can prepare you for defending Nathan MacKinnon like skating against Nathan MacKinnon or Connor McDavid. Like, you just, at some point, you need to, playing against, like I said, depth guys in different organizations doesn't prepare you for that. You have to play against the best. And I think that's why ultimately I fall in the camp of trying to find ways to keep him around as long as you can.
So, big fan of Anthony's work, and I get what he's saying, and I get what you're saying. I would just say I think I actually pretty strongly disagree on this one. I think you can learn a lot and improve a lot in the AHL, especially as a defenseman. I do think being a defenseman, being a young defenseman, is harder than being a young forward. I think your mistakes get exposed a lot more at the NHL level. I think it takes longer to really learn the right habits. And I think, as you know, like I'm usually not even like a, overcook them in the AHL type of guy. Like I've said before, other friends of the podcast, Mark Diver, Andrew Raycroft, I think they fall more in that camp of like, there's no such thing as too much time in the minors. In Lohrei's case, I don't think that's at play here. Like, we're talking about a kid who's played 23 professional hockey games, 15 in the AHL, 8 in the NHL. There is, in my mind, so much more he can learn and will learn and has to learn. And yes, he could learn at the NHL level. I'm not saying he can't. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, there's no way you should keep him around, he's not ready or whatever. Like, yeah, he could learn on the fly at this level. But I also think he absolutely can learn and improve in Providence. Like, I don't think that's I don't think you're sending him to a situation where it's like he has nothing left to prove down there. So what's the point? Like he wasn't dominating in Providence before he got called up. He wasn't playing poorly, but there were like several people when he got called up. That first game he played for the Bruins, I think was still his best game at this level. Like he was terrific that first game. And there were several people, I think, like including Mark and maybe even Anthony. I don't remember exactly what his take was at the time, but people who said like that was better than any game he played in Providence earlier this season. So, you know, we say like, well, is it really that valuable for him to like go down to Providence and just dominate, 25 minutes a night? Well, I would say like he wasn't really dominating down there, and I'm not sure he would be if he gets sent down. Like I think there's still stuff he's gonna work through and learn at that level and be able to improve there and get tested there. Um, and then be in a better position next time he gets called up, which I certainly think is going to be this season. I don't think he's going down for the rest of the year, but um, I I have absolutely no problem sending him down because I think it can be valuable, and that's the direction I would lean right now.
Yeah. So look, there's this conversation for me. It's a win-win. I don't like the Bruins can send him down because they can afford to because the team is winning and they don't need him right now. And I don't. And I'm not saying that he can't benefit from being in Providence. I just think he can benefit more from the NHL because you mentioned there's a lot more you can learn down in Providence, right? Okay, let's talk about that. What can he work on and develop on? Timing, spacing, gap control, strength, like all these things. System play, sure. But you go down to Providence, you work on situational awareness, that's great. But when you're working on your skating, your like I said, your angling, your gap control, your stick positioning, the way you defend, that's great. Love it. But that all changes when he goes back up to Boston because the speed of the game, everything changes. The tempo goes up for all of those facets. Your gap control, your footwork has to be quicker. You're like, it's almost like you're studying. You spent all night studying for an exam, but you realize you read the wrong chapters. Like you got to read different chapters now because everything adjusts at the next level. So okay, let me ask you this. What would he, and again, just to reiterate, the Bruins don't need him right now. You can send him down to Providence. I'm not saying it's bad for him. It's not a big deal. And he will be back up because somebody will get hurt and he'll be back up again at some point. So like I said, this is a win-win situation. But what specifically do you feel he can learn in Providence that he can't learn in the NHL? Is it simply just playing 25 minutes a night and being the guy every night?
Well, that's part of it, playing in situations where he's going to be out there protecting a one goal lead in the third period, which we've seen him get less ice time in those situations at the NHL level. Again, special teams, like he's going to be on Providence's top power play unit, top penalty kill unit, learn those areas, which he's not playing on either unit for Boston. But then even beyond that, like, yeah, like the speed and pace of it, I get is different. But even just like fundamental stuff, like, you know, decision making coming back on a retrieval, like that play last night, decision making at the offensive blue line where he's got caught flat footed a few times now, including last night when uh, he seems to kind of get caught between two minds on whether to try to step up on Nikita Kucherov or fade back and ends up in no man's land and Kucherov just blows past him. And I get, your point would be, well, there's no Nikita Kucherov in Providence. No, but there's still that situation at the offensive blue line of making a quicker, more decisive decision on whether to drop back or pinch. Um, all of that stuff he can work on. His first step, I think there's times where he's still a little slow to get going when he has to quickly change direction. Um, like that's a fundamental thing that can get worked on in practice during the week down in Providence. So yeah, kind of all of that. And like I would just say, like, as far as it being, yeah, obviously NHL is a totally different level than AHL, but all those habits you can learn in Providence and facing competition down there, which is still higher than any other level of competition he's faced. I still think it's really beneficial. Like I think Johnny Beecher is was more ready to be an NHL player this year because he spent a year in Providence. And like similar to Laura, like he was, a little on the older side when he got there. He had 3 years at Michigan. Like, that's hey, Big Ten hockey's a pretty high level. Like, you know, you you could have made an argument like, hey, he's already, a pretty smart defensive player. He's got the size and skating. Like, how much does he really have to learn in Providence? Well, I think he learned quite a bit in Providence last year. I think he got better down there, and yeah, you can't mimic facing NHL competition, but you can learn a lot of fundamentals and get a lot of reps against professionals. Another area would be like just physical battles, which I think Lohrei can work on. And the AHL is a pretty big league. Like there's still, there's grown men in that league, so that's different than college too.
Yeah, those are all good points actually, and I think as you're talking about it, I bring up little things like gap control and stick positioning and angling and different defensive metrics and ways to defend, and how the speed significantly increases at the NHL level. So it's almost like you have to relearn those things. But as you're talking, there are those benefits you're mentioning. There's situational awareness. There's leadership, having the the weight of the team's success on your shoulders, but at the same time not being under the bright lights of the NHL and being so afraid to make mistakes, right? You mentioned like puck retrievals, like yeah, okay, so a little like again situational awareness, special teams, that's true as well. And also the one thing I wouldn't want to have happen at the NHL level is uh, you know his confidence starts to lose or dwindle because for one reason or another he doesn't feel like he can flex his muscle and get to his game in all facets. So if he can go back down to Providence and work on all those things that you're saying, and and be a much more confident player next time he's in Boston, that's another benefit, right? Like you don't want somebody's confidence to go away. You want it to go down to Providence. And if he goes down to Providence now, he really should take off running, right? You mentioned he's only played so many professional games at the AHL level anyway. So yeah, I mean, there are all those benefits you were mentioning, and then some that just came to my mind as well. So again, I think there's pros and cons to both. I do think he's a special talent and can learn on the fly at the NHL level, but I don't think he's in a situation or the Bruins are in a situation where they need that to be the case. There's no need to rush right now. And so like if the Bruins find a way to keep him at the NHL level for a little bit, as I said earlier, I'm not going to be contradictory. Like I'm for that. But for all the reasons you mentioned, Scott, and some that just came to my mind while you were talking, I also see both sides. So it's a situation for the Bruins and for Lohrei where, especially if he has the right mindset going back down, it's a win-win for the organization, and he will be back up at some point. No doubt about it. So, okay, so that's a down for you, Scott, but it was more of a talking point in general, and it's been a polarizing one. It's been the hottest debate among Bruins fans. I would say over the last 3 or 4 weeks, Scott, has been what to do with him when Grizzly comes back.
Yeah, and again, just to like circle back, the very last thing I'd note on him is I'm not saying he needs like the rest of the season in Providence, right? Like it could be go down for 10 games, a couple weeks. Here's a laundry list of things we want you to work on, and the next situation that presents itself for whatever reason, injury, someone struggling, whatever it might be, he could be back up by Christmas. So it's not a permanent call. Did you have any downs, or you want to move on to ups?
You kind of mentioned them earlier, and it's the low hanging fruit. It's just the whole, DeBrusk and Patra still not really getting on the score sheet. And again, people can, yell at me till they're blue in the face. He's doing everything else. He's doing everything else. Okay, great. Well, he's not scoring, so he's gonna do that too. So especially when you're paid to be a scorer and a team needs you. Now, fortunately for him, other guys have stepped up. We talked about it earlier: Coyle, Zaka, JVR, even Frederick at times. But you mentioned how last night Coyle, JVR, and Frederick were quiet. It was a quiet game for them. Well, that was true until it wasn't. And even in their quiet games, they've found ways to contribute. And it seems like it's been the opposite for DeBrusk and Patra as of late. Like, you can see that they're trying, but they're not scoring. And I hate to be this black and white about it, but at some point you gotta start scoring. And when they do, we will not talk about it anymore. When, like, you don't hear me being like, Jacob Lauko, kid's gonna get going, or Oscar Steen, he's gonna get scoring for them, because that's not the expectation for them. So, like, at the NHL level, it's 82 game regular seasons. I understand there's going to be slumps and there's going to be off nights, but you can't just keep applauding effort. Like, for certain players, you have to have the effort and you have to produce. It's the name of the game. That's the business that they're in. And so until, he starts breaking out of the slump on the score sheet, he's got to be a bit of a down. I mean, 1 goal through the first month and a half. Come on. I mean, you could be the biggest Jake DeBrusk apologist, but he's got to have a couple more goals at this point than that, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. And, as we've said, and as Jim Montgomery's kind of noted, like, no matter how much you tell a guy, hey, just keep doing the right things, point out good things that he's doing, like, when you're used to scoring and you're not scoring, you get frustrated and other stuff starts to slip. So that's like another part that you have to guard against. And that kind of makes a slump like this, even more concerning, is other parts of his game, I think, have fallen off a little bit already and might continue to fall off. Like, if it doesn't go in, like, it can snowball on guys. And, sometimes, like, at some point you just need like some sort of reset or maybe it requires a line change, even though your top 2 lines you don't want to split up. So yeah, the sooner, DeBrusk in particular, the sooner he gets going, the better. But yeah, that does need to happen at some point. Just another obvious down this week is, of course, Milan Lucic, which we covered more in depth on our last episode. So if people missed that, they can go back and listen to it, just to update on sort of just a straight news front. So while we've been recording, Lucic was in court for his arraignment, and just reading from some reporters who were there, like Jonathan Hall from 7 News. He issued a not guilty plea for assault and battery charges, and was released on his own recognizance. Pre-trial date is set for January 19th. He doesn't have to appear in person. He can appear via Zoom. So that's just sort of the latest news update there. Obviously, what that means, for the Bruins, as of right now, he's still on an indefinite leave from the team. And I would expect that to continue for a while, as this gets sorted through on the legal front. But that we'll see how it plays out.
So for ups, Scott, this one is so obvious that we haven't even named him this year, I don't think, as an up, and it's David Pastrnak. And obviously he's one of the best players in the world, and the Bruins need him to be that for them. And because he has been that for them, we've just kind of expected it and not really given him the allure of having a skate pod up notification. And we're gonna end that now, and we're gonna give that to him this week, Scott. And he's got 29.
I think he's gonna be thrilled. I think he's been waiting for that all year.
He's been refreshing. Yeah, he's been refreshing Twitter and an Apple Podcast to look.
He's like, why is the skate pod not making me an up? I got to keep scoring now.
So he's got, obviously he's been doing this thing. He's got 29 points in 17 games. Mathematician McLaughlin might be able to give me the projection there, but He's second in the NHL in points right now behind Quinn Hughes in Vancouver, which is very impressive for Quinn Hughes as a defenseman. But yeah, I mean, obviously the Bruins offensively have gone as Pastrnak has gone, and another goal last night, game-tying goal, just really elevating his game. I mentioned off the top, him and McAvoy just really stepping up as the next generation's leaders and best players. And yeah, he's, again, every week is the obvious choice. He's got 29 points in 17 games this year, so there hasn't been a down for him all year. But just elevating his game to the next level, especially in the absence of Bergeron retiring and Krejci. It's just there's offensively there's been no setback in his game, and he's stepped up.
Yeah, he's on pace for 58 goals and 82 assists for 140 points. And
that's not bad. That might get him a couple more ups this year.
Yeah. I do think like what's really stood out this season, even more than previous seasons, is his playmaking. Like he's averaging an assist per game, 17 assists in 17 games. And you saw a very unselfish play Monday night to set up Pavel Zacha for the Bruins' first goal, where Marchand gets it down to him, and he's basically one-on-one with Jonas Johansson, Tampa's fill-in goalie, and kind of gets Johansson dragged out of position and then slides it back to Zacha for an open net. Just a really nice play. He's getting more assists in the power play this year, and I think you've seen him like not force his shot as much. He's been more willing to set up teammates, and one area where like we've talked about, the Bruins adjusting to Zacha in the bumper versus Bergeron. One option that can now be more opened up for them is Pastrnak passing into the bumper for a shot. Like it used to be, it was Marchand to Bergeron for that quick one time in the bumper. Like it can go Pastrnak to Zacha now. If Pasternak's shot isn't there, don't force it. Like he does have, sort of an additional option that wasn't there as much last year. We've also seen him dump it down to JVR right in front or on the doorstep a few times. And JVR is so good in that area that I think there's a trust that, that is a legitimate outlet and a way to score goals. So, yeah, I think you're seeing his playmaking at possibly the highest level of his career, certainly assist wise, just in terms of the raw numbers, the highest level of his career, but just more unselfish play. And that's probably going to swing back around at some point where if teams start to respect that playmaking more and realize like, hey, he is going to feed that open teammate, so we better try to take away the pass. Now all of a sudden the shot's back, and you'll not that he's scoring goals at like much of a lower rate. As I said, he's on pace for 58 of them, but like that could open up even more shot attempts for him.
Yeah, I mean he's a hat trick next game away from being on pace for like 65, right? So, I mean I think, and this is nothing to do with Bergeron. Obviously, Bergeron is an all-timer and was phenomenal on the power play, but I just kind of have had this thought in my mind this year that because Bergeron's gone and Zacha's in his place in the bumper, it's less about Bergeron and Zacha, their skill sets. It's about the handedness, right? Like I've kind of thought that the power play could operate better, more efficiently now with a lefty in the bumper as a righty, because as you mentioned, like I just feel like when Marchand was feeding Bergeron as a righty, that pass is coming from Marchand, right? And I just think that because Marchand seldom shot, it was too predictable. Well, now with Zacha as a lefty, you have the Pastrnak now feeding him, and he's obviously a shot first threat. So when you're a shot first threat, like now that bumper position becomes more open, and it's more effective coming from Pasternak's flank than Marchand. And Pastrnak is straight up at this point in both of their careers a better playmaker than Marchand. So yeah, I mean, I just think that obviously I kind of made this a power play specific point, but yeah, I think that this is why structurally I feel like the power play running through Pastrnak should be more efficient than it has been in the past, for all the reasons I just said. So yeah, I mean he's been really good. And yeah, so he's definitely the skate putt up so far. So and again, like second in NHL in scoring. At that, he could obviously jump into first at any point. And again, this is kind of interesting because we're so used to seeing Draisaitl and McDavid as the 1 and 2 for the last handful of years. Like, it's always been, all right, who's going to finish 3rd through 5th in scoring? But I mean, Edmonton's obviously, they've just been continuing to struggle, and McDavid and Draisaitl are like, they might be top 20 scorers. They might not be. I haven't checked that far down the list yet, but so it's kind of open for anybody, and that's why you see Quinn Hughes is the leading scorer and Pastrnak right there. Any follow up to that?
Just mentioning like the leading scorers, like it is crazy to see a defenseman on top. Quinn Hughes, 30 points in 19 games, and kind of touch on, but it's like, unfortunately, if Hughes and Cale Makar's not far behind, he's 27 points in 17 games. Like, if those guys stay anywhere close to that pace, it's like, fortunately, McAvoy's not really going to have much of a chance, but he could be top 3 Norris candidate. But yeah, you're right. Like, it is more open. You see JT Miller and Elias Pettersson up there for Vancouver as well. William Nylander for Toronto in a contract year, by the way. Talked about someone who's setting himself up for quite the payday. Obviously, Kucherov. Like, it could be a more open, and keeping this like Pastrnak specifically, like a much more open Hart Trophy race. Whereas last year, I feel like from basically November on, as great as Pastrnak was, he was playing for second because Connor McDavid was just running away from everyone. That's not really happening with anyone this year. So, we've talked about how much the Bruins offense is running through Pastrnak. I think he's a point in like 48% of their goals this season. Like, he's going to be right at or near the top of that conversation.
Scott, do you know off the top of your head, and if you don't, I want you to guess, so don't ruin the fun. Do you know where Connor McDavid right now, days before Thanksgiving, ranks among leading scorers in the league?
I didn't look, so I'm going to guess 33rd.
He's 62nd in the league in scoring right now. And that's 15 points in 15 games. So that kind of shows you how offensive the league is these days. A point per game gets you, 62nd in the league in scoring. But yeah, he's 62nd. He's sandwiched between Connor Bedard, Sebastian Aho, and then Connor Bedard. Connor Bedard is 63rd in scoring with 15 points in 15 games as well. But Connor McDavid is 6 goals, 9 assists, 15 points, -5 in 15 games. And this is not like one of those situations where it's like, oh, a week or two into the season. Like, no, I mean, you're a month and a half into this in a regular season, and the best player in the world is 62nd in scoring. That's, I mean, Edmonton's issues historically have been defensive, but I mean, when that just goes to show, if Connor McDavid is playing at a point per game pace, like Edmonton's screwed. Like a point per game pace, and they're screwed, let alone superhuman like he usually is. So that jumps out. And I think I saw Draisaitl was like maybe 15th or 20. I don't know, but
yeah, and McDavid did miss a few games, but still, like, point per game is clearly a down year for him when we're used to, seeing him like 120 points plus, and even Draisaitl's usually top 3 or 4 in the league, not whatever, tied for 13th right now. But by the way, another just like crazy one, and I know team wise they've fallen off a bit, but Sidney Crosby still just right up there, tied 13th, 22 points in 17 games. Like, just impressive to still see him doing that. I don't, unfortunately for them, I still don't think they have a good enough team around him to really do much, but he's just still going at such a high level.
Yeah, he is. I wonder how many years he has left, Scott. I mean, he wasn't too far behind the Bergeron. Was it drafted a year after Bergeron?
Yeah, I believe. Yeah,
and I could see him doing something like Bergeron, where like he might retire after like being a top 10 or top 15 scorer in the league, like kind of going out while you're still at an elite level. I mean, Bergeron retired after winning the Selke, right? And was the number one center on the best regular season record team of all time. Record team of all time. It's subjective if they're the actual best regular season team. But anyway,
yeah,
so
Crosby has another year after this left on his current contract. Like, I do wonder if like that might be the end point is after next
I mean,
season.
he's got the 3 cups. If Pittsburgh's in a situation where he just doesn't think that they can compete, but he still wants to play, could you ever see him in a different uniform for like like a Ray Bork to Colorado thing? Even though he's got the 3 cups, but if he wants to have a shot at one more and wants to play another year and doesn't think Pittsburgh is it, could you see him going in a different sweater?
I don't know. I mean, what about like centering a line with like his fellow Nova Scotian and former Team Canada line mate Brad Marchand?
Oh boy, Scott, you can't say that.
That's it for this week, guys.
You can't say that an hour 15 in. That's just leaving too much turkey on the bone there.
My honest answer is no. I can't see him playing for a team other than Pittsburgh. But I do remember like a couple years ago they were like, I don't think there's anything to them, but there were rumors about like, would Crosby want to trade to, kind of finish out his career or whatever? Because I think Pittsburgh had either like just missed the playoffs, or I think they had gotten swept in the first round or something, and didn't really seem to be on an upward trajectory. But I sort of feel like if it wasn't going to happen then, where he might have had like a 3 or 4 year run at it somewhere else, then I don't see it happening now. He's so much a part of that organization, and it would be really hard to imagine.
I mean, when's the last time they made the playoffs? It's been a couple of years, right? If they were to miss it, if they were to be out of it again at the deadline this year, I don't know. Maybe he does. You're right. He does see a need for a top 2 center, and with one of his best buddies in Boston. That would be quite the story. The number one.
Yeah, I mean,
Boston's missing is Sidney Crosby.
So last year was the first year they completely missed the playoffs since 2006, but 2020 they lost in like the qualifying round. The silly play-in whatever in the bubble. The last time they won a playoff series was 2018.
Yeah,
like that's
even Boston hasn't won a playoff series since 2021 against Washington, but yeah, that's clearly not as far as Pittsburgh. I mean, there's probably a million reasons, and the first one being cap related why he wouldn't end up in Boston. But if he ended up in Boston, I mean, with the defense and goaltending and supporting cast that they have, I mean, that'd be pretty close to a Stanley Cup. Look, after last year, there's never a Stanley Cup lock, but that would be quite the development. But anyway, Scott, it's Thanksgiving this week, not Christmas, so it's not on my list. So with that said, maybe we can probably just wrap this one up.
Yeah, and I think, just to let people know, we are not planning on doing a third episode this week with Thanksgiving. So we'll be back. I think our plan is going to be to record sometime Sunday, drop Monday morning, like usual. And obviously we'll have plenty to discuss because the Bruins play 3 times between now and then at Florida on Wednesday, the Black Friday home game against Detroit, and then at New York Saturday afternoon, a back-to-back. And I'm actually heading down to New York for that one, so might have some tales from the Big Apple. We'll see.
Very nice. All right, well, thank you all for listening. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and like Scott said, we'll talk to you next week.